Well, I'll start this off just to welcome everyone. I'm sure more will be joining us in the minutes to come, but my part is not terribly important. So we'll get through me so we can get to Anne and her presentation because there's a lot to cover. First, my name is Alex Rogalski. I'm a program consultant here at Sask Arts. I'm based in the Saskatoon office in Treaty 6 territory. My colleagues down in Regina and Treaty 4 territory are also joining us today. We have a lot of people from around the province, so I'm so glad you're taking advantage of this webinar, which is the first in a series that we're offering as part of the Sask Shift program, which is a partnership between Sask Arts, Creative Saskatchewan, and Arts Action Research. It's a year-long program we're running with a number of different facets to it, as many of you might be aware from an information session we held a little over a month ago. These webinars, we're planning on 5 or 6 of them. This is the first. The second, you can already mark in your calendar, will be happening on Wednesday, December 1st. Wednesday, December 1st from 1 to 3 p.m. as well. We're going to try and keep them consistent on Wednesday afternoons. And then there will be a few more in the new year. So however you found out about this one, you can find out about the next ones in the same way. We'll try and reach as many people as possible, and feel free to spread the word. We can handle as many people as I think we would likely envision seeing in this. So you're welcome to tell other people who you think might be interested and benefit from this professional development. We're joined here today with Anne Dunning from Arts Action Research. She'll be leading the presentation and webinar today with a lot of really great information that I think is helpful in many ways to a wide range of organizations. That's why we engaged with them, because it challenges us as an arts funding organization as well to look at how we operate and things we can do to improve as an organization. Couple more things I just want to point out to you today. We will be recording the session, and it's not to hold you accountable for anything you want to say in the chat or share online. It's more so that we can make this available for those who were unable to join us this afternoon. So feel free to speak freely. I will be going off camera, so pretend that Sask Arts is not present. So you can speak as openly as you wish about us as a provincial arts funder. Anne is willing to listen and has her own suggestions of where arts funding can go. So I'm hoping there's a lot of open discourse today as part of her presentation. Additionally, should you require it or benefit from it, we have a live transcription option available. If you look towards the top of your screen, you'll see the live on otter.ai. Click here to open live transcript, and that is available to you should it be of benefit to your ability to participate today. I believe that's everything on my part. I see we continue to fill up, so nice so many could join us. I'm going to go off camera and mute myself and turn it over to Anne. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. Great to be with you all today. If virtually, I am joining you from Boston, Massachusetts, which is the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts people. And I am excited to be starting this series of webinars with arts groups across Saskatchewan, and happy to be able to talk with you today about some really sort of fundamental issues and ideas around the practice of creating, producing, presenting, connecting, and supporting art in this time. I would love to, before I get started, since we're a relatively small group, would love to just know who you all are. And I see some of you have put your affiliations in the chat, and appreciate that. But I do want to take a quick minute to invite you all, each in turn, to introduce yourselves to your colleagues. Let us know where you're based and what organization you're with, so that we have an idea of who is joining us today. If I can call on folks, that's probably the easiest way to bring you into the conversation. And so I would ask Leah to come on and introduce.
Sure, thanks, Anne. Guess my video hasn't started yet.
There you are.
Hi, I'm Leah Garvin, and I am a curator manager of galleries for the City of North Battleford. And that includes the Alan Sapp Gallery, the Goner Collection, And then our regional gallery, the Chapel Gallery, features art heritage of the region.
Fantastic. Thanks, Leah. Thanks for joining us. Stephen, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Stephen Walchmit. I'm the Artistic Director of Burnt Thicket Theatre in Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory, and looking forward to learning what we can. We're a smaller organization, but are growing. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Gordon, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I've got a bad cold, so forgive me. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of the Lyric Theatre in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, on Treaty 4 territory, and also of the Lyric's Great Southwest Shakespeare Festival. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Gordon. Do hope you're feeling better soon. Kristen, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kristen Teetart. I'm the program coordinator and gallery director at the Last Mountain Lake Cultural Center, which is in Regina Beach, about 45 minutes north of the city of Regina.
Thank you. Welcome. David, could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm just having trouble getting my mic going here. Yeah, my name is Dave Hanna. I'm a contract administrator for the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra, which is a big band jazz group that's been going in Saskatoon for 7 or 8 years now, and are just in the stage of sort of transitioning from hand to mouth kind of operations and trying to build a little bit more potential to keep ourselves, going and financially strong in the long run.
Fantastic, thank you. I hope we can help you in thinking about that next phase for your organization. Darcy, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate that. And Alex, Darcy McLean, the Executive Director of Sask Interactive. I'm the Sask Interactive is the interactive digital media in the province. Anything from the creative sector, I'm located in Saskatoon, but my head office is at 1831 College in Regina.
Fantastic, thanks, Darcy. Heather, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Heather Benning. I'm the director of the Art Gallery of Swift Current, and that's it, I guess. So.
Fantastic. Thanks, Heather. Thanks for joining us. And I'll invite Kent, who I know is your colleague, to introduce himself as well.
Everybody, I'm Kent Archer. I'm the newly hired curator at the Art Gallery of Swift Current. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Kent. Michael, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Sorry. Mike Dawson. I'm the executive director at Sask Music. It's a provincial organization. We have offices based in Regina and in Saskatoon.
Fantastic. Thank you. Amber, could you introduce yourself?
Oops. Hello. Hi. I'm Amber Phelps-Bondaroff, she, her, and I work at Neutral Ground on Treaty 4 in Regina.
Fantastic, thank you. Paulo, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi there. I'm Paulo Fligg. I work for the Station Arts Center in Rostern, Saskatchewan. I'm the director of operations, and I'm filling in for Josie Lachance, who is on maternity leave. Yep.
Fantastic, thank you, Paulo.
Welcome.
Jara, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, hi there. I am Jara. I recently started at Neutral Ground in Regina on Treaty 4. I am the admin staff person.
Thank you. Nicole, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nicole Thiessen, and I'm the programming director at the Station Arts Center in Rostern. So I work with Paulo, and we're sort of a multifunctional arts center with a performing arts theater, a gallery, and sort of a eatery, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks. I'd love a place with an eatery. That's a, a great feature. Sarah, could you introduce yourself?
Well, hello. I'm Sarah Simison. I'm the Executive Director for the Saskatchewan Festival of Words in Moose Jaw, Treaty 4. I think our Operations Coordinator, Amanda Farnell, is going to join us, so I'll introduce her on her behalf. I think she's just in another meeting right now. I am also at home with a sick toddler, so if I get called upon for anything else and I don't answer, I'm probably attending to that. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for letting us know, and do hope the toddler is feeling better soon.
Thank you. He's napping right now, but we'll see how long that lasts.
Fingers crossed, right? Also, just to point out that a couple of the team members from Sask Arts are on the call as well. We've got Noreen and Carmel, who are with us today. And my colleague Becky has just joined as well. She's another consultant with Arts Action Research. So we've got a nice group of folks with us today. Thank you all for joining and for being here for this session. This is an opportunity to share with you some ideas, some context, and some concepts about arts management and arts activity. I will say I'm going to speak today and share with you some ideas. I will open the space for questions and comments as I go through. But if you have questions as I'm speaking and you want to throw them in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. You are welcome to be on screen or not, as you wish. If you want to go off camera, feel free to do that. And if you want to get my attention, you can certainly come off of mute to catch my attention. But otherwise, it's helpful for everyone to stay on mute so that our sound quality remains high. So today, I'm really going to outline for you some key concepts and some key elements of context for the creation, production, connection, and support of arts and culture in this time. And I really am starting with this workshop because in the work that we do at Arts Action Research and that we want to share with you over the next number of months through this project, there are some really fundamental things that we have learned from working in the sector over several decades that we find are often not discussed, are not shared, or not spoken about, but underlie a lot of the opportunities and challenges and ways of working that exist in our sector. And that as we start work in any place, it's helpful for us to share these things, to talk about these things, to bring these things to the surface, to really ground our work together in an honest assessment of the current realities and in a reflection on some of the concepts and approaches that we see organizations adopting and using to really engage with their work and with their communities and with the realities of the current circumstances and environment for work in the arts and culture sector. I'm going to start this conversation with a discussion about the current context for this work that you are all undertaking. And I want to say a couple of things about this context before I get started. First, I think it's really important to say that I'm going to take about half an hour here to lay out context. And that is not a lot of time to sort of fully describe the nuance and detail of the current environment for this work. What it does give me the opportunity to do is to highlight some key things that I think aren't coming forward in a lot of discussions in the sector. And to give you kind of a brief overview or the headlines of some of the contextual basis of our current realities that I think are important for us to take into consideration as we're planning and developing and building and growing our organizations. I'm going to share overall trends and undercurrents of what's going on in society at large that impact the arts, and also some of the things that are happening directly within our own sector. Both of these things are crucial for our organizations in that we don't operate in a vacuum. We work within our sector, but we also work within our society and our community, and we're very much impacted by the things that are happening beyond the sector, beyond the sort of silo, as it were, of our operational basis in the nonprofit arts. I'm going to share with you some good examples, some ideas, some thoughts about things. But one thing I want you to understand and know about the work that we do at Arts Action Research and about all of the things that we share is that we fundamentally do not believe that there is a single model to which all arts entities should aspire. And often in our sector, we see people like us, other consultants, really trying to get many organizations to start to frame their operations in ways that are unified and templated and subscribed to specific models of working. And we believe that's been very detrimental to the field in that it doesn't recognize the innate diversity and value and uniqueness of the different organizations, visions, missions, artistic processes that make our sector so rich. And so while I want to share with you several of these concepts, the things that we've learned from organizations working in the sector, I also want you to take that information in with a sort of critical eye to what works for you and what ideas you might adapt to your own circumstances, not with the intention or the idea that you should somehow conform your vision, your goals, your approach to working to somebody else's model, approach, or structure of working. And as we work with groups in different aspects of this Sask Shift project, one of the things we will be doing is really helping to uplift the individual approaches and ways of working and approaches that come from within the sector and from the different organizations that bring their individual strengths to the work. In talking through this, I'm going to use a couple of terms, and I want to just be clear about these from the outset. The first term that you'll hear me use is professional. I'll talk about professional arts organizations, professional leadership. What I mean by professional is the intention to work within a professional environment with professionalism in the work. I'm not referring to any financial circumstances. I'm not referring to any qualifications. I'm not referring to any specific level of activity or location of activity. I'm really focusing on what is the intention of the work. So if I talk about professional, it's about the intention of the work. The other term I'm going to use is organization. I'll talk about arts organizations. An organization to me encompasses a wide range of entities. They are organizations that are individuals working on projects from a project to project. They may be large institutionalized organizations with many staff and structure. But it encompasses a full range of the kinds of structures that artists and arts professionals use to get their work done. And so I don't mean organization in a very narrow sense of a particular structure or format, but in a broad sense of all of the entities that organize themselves around doing this work. So with those definitions and caveats in place, I want to share with you 6 observations about the environment in which the nonprofit arts are working at this time. And I'm going to start with this observation, which is that the environment in which we are working ranges from volatile to hostile. And that is a pretty startling statement for a lot of folks because we don't always talk about this reality. We don't always talk about the reality that the work that we're doing right now is happening within a context that is in a space of volatility and in some cases a space of hostility around the work. What do I mean by that? Well, by volatility, I mean that we're working in an environment that is rapidly changing, that is highly unpredictable, and that is full of potential, both positive and negative. We all know that socially, in society at large, there's a lot of volatility right now, driven by things like natural disasters and the increasing impacts of climate change, by disease and things like pandemics, which we're all experiencing now, by financial chaos and political chaos and upheaval. And those social volatilities are amplified and played out within our own environment within the nonprofit arts sector. Especially right now, this volatility has put most of our organizations in a place where it is extremely difficult to plan and where our time horizon has shortened considerably. So where we used to work with organizations on 3 to 5 year strategic plans, now we find ourselves in a space where organizations are planning annually or quarterly or monthly, because any plans that we make today are likely to be obsolete in a world 6, 8, 12 months from now, when the operating realities around us have shifted considerably. And so it requires us to be in a constant state of planning in our organizations to continually assess our environment, adapt and change our organizations in response to the volatility of the environment around us. On the other end, I talked about this environment as being hostile. And hostile, I mean, in the sense that for the arts and culture, we're in a time, in a period in which there are actual ideological oppositions to the arts, things like religious or political objections to the arts and the values that are often conveyed through the arts. And also the sort of suppression of the arts because artists tend to reflect and speak truth in a space in which increasingly we're also seeing a real repression of truth and a subversion of truth. And so artists are often repressed or subverted by those forces who want to create their own truths or shift the realities in which they're portraying themselves. But beyond those ideological oppositions, there is also a general devaluing that has happened and that exists around the arts and what we contribute to society and to our communities. And this is really driven very much by the rise in consumer culture and the decline of community and citizenship culture, in that money is equated with value. And artists and arts organizations and artwork, which values things other than money, which values truth and beauty and exploration and ideas and feeling, often is not valued within that monetary system and is sometimes demonized within that monetary system that creates value around bottom lines and growth and dollars. And so in this environment, which is volatile to hostile, what we've been seeing over the past number of years is that arts organizations are existing somewhere on the spectrum between stress and crisis. We rarely encounter a nonprofit arts organization that is not at least in a state of stress, in which the resources that that organization has are not already in a state of tension with the expectations, with the outputs that that organization is trying to undertake. And where in many cases, organizations are already moving from that state of stress into a state of crisis, in which it's becoming untenable to sustain those artistic missions, values, and programs. And without intervention, the organization is at risk of closing or diminishing returns in terms of what they're able to produce. We often talk about this in terms of an equation and say that what we see is that organizations are operating 30 to 50% above the real level of human and financial resources. And what I mean by that is we have a balance in our organizations between the inputs, the financial resources, the human resources, the space, the equipment, the time that we have, and the outputs that we create, the programs, the services, the art, the activities that are generated by our organizations. And what we see regularly is that the outputs actually exceed the level of inputs for many organizations by as much as 30 to 50%. So we have this gap that exists in organizations. Now that gap can be a financial gap, but most arts organizations don't have the capacity to actually borrow money. So instead of a financial gap, what we have in our sector more often is a human resources gap. It is the reality that we're actually pushing our people 30 to 50% beyond their real level of capacity. We're overdrawing on our human resources. And when we do that consistently over a long period of time, what we're ending up with is an extreme state of burnout in which people can literally no longer sustain that level, and they have to step back or leave the sector entirely in order to rebalance their own lives. And that's a huge crisis for our industry in which we've invested and we depend on our people. And so there's a crisis growing for us around this gap that creates stress and crisis within our organizations. The level of stress in our organizations is also exacerbated by a number of unrealistic or outdated measures of success, which we often use and ascribe to in the sector. And these are things like expectations about what boards can and will do for our organizations, their expectations about growth and what that means for our sector, and their expectations about the model of how we should work or the organizational structure that best supports the work that we're trying to do. And I want to kind of point out one of these things, which I think has been a considerable issue for many organizations, which is this unrealistic expectation about growth. It's what we call the growth paradigm, which is the idea that if an organization isn't growing, it isn't succeeding. And this really comes from a for-profit model of generating profit, that growth is good, that more profit is better, that being larger is better than being small. And what we find is that organizations in our sector are often pushed to grow when that is not, in fact, a value for the work that they're trying to do. Where organizations that remained small and lean and adaptable were often much better suited to the volatility of the environment, to the values of the work, than pushing the organization to institutionalize and grow simply to record growth and therefore feel successful. And so we need to change our mindset about what success is. and recognize that success in our sector is not always growth. Sometimes success is about intimacy, it's about working small and lean and adaptably. And we need to value those things and recognize that they are truly effective ways of working and successful ways of working for our organizations. The third observation that I have about this period of time is that in this environment in which we're working, our funding partners are struggling and in some cases disappearing. It is critical for our sector that we work in partnership with a number of different sectors and organizations. And one of the sectors that has been so critical to our work over many generations is the philanthropic sector. It is the body of organizations and individuals who advance the work of nonprofits through their contributions, grants, and donations. And we've seen shifts in how some of those organizations approach their support of the arts over the past number of years. For example, corporate philanthropy, in which corporations and businesses at one time saw themselves as community builders and supporters and would contribute to organizations in their community that provided for the public good. Organizations like arts organizations in their communities. That philosophy, that approach in corporations has shifted considerably over the past 25 to 30 years. And we now find ourselves in a place where there is almost no corporate philanthropy. And the corporate dollars that do come to arts and culture are largely tied to corporate goals like advertising or promotion through sponsorship contributions, or employee retention through matching grants. And so those partners, those funding partners, are both fewer than they used to be for our sector and considerably more focused on their own goals and ends than on the arts sector's intentions, programs, and activities. At the same time, foundations and government grant makers who have been a pivotal support in building the sector, in supporting the sector, and who still play an enormously important role in keeping our sector healthy and growing, have found themselves in a place where they are often stuck in outdated approaches to funding, even as our environment, as I mentioned earlier, is rapidly changing. And so we see, for example, many of these funders who create approaches to funding that no longer fit with the environment and the realities that we face, asking for grant applications 6 months, a year, 8 months before activities happen, when organizations are still in phases of planning for month-long, quarter-long, year-long activities, and can't fully articulate what's going to happen a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. Oftentimes, funders in their decision-making processes take a considerable amount of time to make funding decisions, which again, in a volatile environment, leaves arts organizations hanging, uncertain about the resource base that they have to depend on. And many of these funders, in their pursuit of impact goals, of intellectual ideas about the kind of impact they want to make, have shifted from being operational funders supporting the infrastructure of our sector that really underlies getting much of the work done, to programmatic funders supporting initiatives or programs, really focusing on the development of new programs rather than on sustaining existing programs, and often curating their own programs that they support as opposed to putting money into the programming, missions, and activities of the nonprofits that make up the sector. And while not all of our foundation and government funders suffer from these challenges of keeping up with the realities that we face in the sector, it is becoming increasingly difficult for organizations to build any kind of a sustainable support base through our institutional funding partners. Another observation about the way that the environment is changing and the context for our work has changed is that our community and who we see as community and who we engage as community has extended, has advanced and has grown from being a local community to being both a local community, a regional community, a national community, and a global community. And what we've seen over the past number of years, and particularly recently with the impacts of the pandemic, are that one, artists are building deeper and more involved relationships and connections with their local communities. We have seen a lot of work in recent years, some of it funded within communities in which we work, to really recognize and advance those artists who have consistently over time been invested in their communities and in supporting artists who have had less connection with their communities to start to build those pivotal and important connections that create deep engagement with the work, with the community needs, and with the artists who are involved. At the same time, new technologies and the ability to connect remotely to other geographic locations have expanded the global engagement of artists and arts organizations, providing opportunities to connect through virtual presentations and to build partnerships between artists across geographic boundaries. And this has created a much more multicultural rather than monocultural approach to arts and culture. And it has allowed us to find commonalities with people who are more geographically distant from ourselves. Within our communities, our audiences and those key people who engage with our work most deeply have changed. And audience behavior has fundamentally shifted over the past 10 to 15 years. We see, for example, that in our audiences, we no longer have a monolithic audience who comes to us with a shared life experience. Back in the period in which the arts and culture were much more focused on a particular economic class, on a particular educational class, there was an expectation and an understanding that audiences came with a particular experience base, a particular understanding of the arts and culture and their engagement with it. Now we're reaching new audiences, both through technology and through taking the work out of some of the spaces, the traditional art spaces, and into our communities. We're able to actually engage new audiences, more diverse audiences, and audiences that have real specific connections to different types of work and different artists. And so that has expanded the audience for the arts and the diversity of the audiences for the arts. At the same time, because of generational changes, we're also seeing a different way of approaching arts experiences, where past generations were much more inclined to lock into prescribed arts experiences. Now we're finding generations are interested in more flexibility, in making decisions about their arts experience more last minute, closer to the actual experience, of seeking out experiences that are more user-driven, that allow them more engagement, involvement, and control over their experiences. And for example, we've seen an entire shift from a world in which subscription-based audiences in things like performing arts have really shifted very much into a event-based or experience-based model of approaching and connecting with the work. And finally, I think in terms of audiences, one of the things that has been increasingly happening for our audiences is that the folks who are interested in engaging and connecting with the work are very much looking for opportunities to connect to work that connects with their own personal values, that reflects things that are meaningful to them, and that create opportunities for intimacy and engagement with other people, with artists, and with ideas. And so there's an interest and a drive towards those kinds of experiences. The final observation I want to share about what's been happening in our environment is about arts education. And many people see arts education as actually a different sector from the professional arts sector. But I want to argue that arts education is very much a part of the arts and culture sector, and one that we need to be more connected to, more aware of, and more committed to as arts professionals. What we have seen is that arts education is greatly diminished, and in some cases non-existent in the school experience, in the educational experience of young people. In some cases, we're into the second generation of young people who have not had significant art experiences in their education, which means that a child today may not have an arts experience through their schooling, and they may live in a home with a parent who never had such an experience and therefore doesn't know to take their child to those experiences and engage them with arts at a young age. And this is critical because what we see is through data is that young people who don't have those experiences early in life do not become patrons, do not become artists, do not value the arts and culture in their communities in the same way that young people have who have those experiences early in life. And so we need to think about how can we become more activated around building arts education and rebuilding arts education to a place where it is central and is provided to every child in their educational experience. And so there are these 6 things that I've shared with you, that the environment for the arts and culture right now ranges from hostile to volatile, that organizations are existing somewhere between stress and crisis, that our funding partners are struggling and disappearing, that our community has extended from local to global, that our audiences have transformed and that audience behavior has fundamentally changed, and that arts education is greatly diminished or non-existent. And this set of circumstances has really, over a number of years, transformed what was once a more sort of stable environment for the arts into what feels often like a very challenging environment to navigate. And a lot of folks who look at this think about this as situational. We think about returning to normal, that somehow this time we're in is not normal, somehow this time is disrupted, and that there will be a return to the golden age of the arts. And we hear this a lot right now, particularly with the pandemic, where we're all talking about returning to normal. When will things return to normal? And I think the reality that we in the sector need to really think about here is that the normal that we may be aspiring to, the past we may think we're going back to, in fact, is not coming back. And that these things that I described and their continued evolution are the normal in which we work. And what we really need as organizations is not to think situationally about a return to a past, to a normal, to a different state, but about how we can most effectively navigate our reality now as it is and as it continues to evolve. This seems like a pretty daunting task, I know, because many of the things I described here are very difficult things to overcome for small organizations working with minimal resources. But I feel very positive that we are actually very well positioned to embrace these realities, to address these realities, to adapt and change in amazing ways in our sector. And I believe that strongly because of a number of things that I know. First, I know that you cannot stop artists from making work. If we look throughout human history, the drive to create, the drive towards art, the drive towards expression that art embodies has existed within all cultures, within all communities, in all places. It is innate to our humanity to want to create this work in multiple different ways. And no matter how or why a community actually tries to suppress or push back this drive, it continues to thrive and move forward in our communities, in our society, in our world culture. We can defund arts organizations and artists. We can imprison artists in many cultures. We can ban artworks, and yet art continues to succeed because there has continued to be a drive to do the work, to make the work happen, no matter what the obstacles in the way of doing that are. And the second thing I know is that you can't stop people from wanting to connect to that work that artists create. Not only is it in our humanity to want to create, but it is in our humanity to want to connect to each other through that work. We see at our greatest moments of celebration that we want art and culture and creativity to be part of those moments, and that at our greatest moments of despair, that we want arts and culture to soothe us, to comfort us, and to bring us together. And so there is always an audience, a community that gathers around the work, that wants the work, that needs the work, that engages with the work. The third thing I know that makes me hopeful is that arts professionals, the people that create, connect, support, and commit to this work, are entrepreneurial by nature. This is an extraordinary group of people who are innovative, who are resilient, who have enormous drive and determination, and who often have incredible reserves of creativity to really navigate difficult challenges and to create amazing opportunities. I work all the time with nonprofit arts professionals, and I know that in many places and in many communities, because of the devaluing of arts and culture, our arts and culture professionals are not considered to be as serious, as committed, as intelligent, as driven as folks in, for example, the business sector. And I will tell you in my experience of people that that is absolutely untrue, and that in most cases, I would put up any arts professional against anyone working in any other sector for their capacity and their drive to do the work, to make it happen, and to have the capacity and ability to do it extremely well. And the final thing I know that makes me very hopeful is that in our sector, we have access to what is the most effective planning, problem solving, decision-making, relationship building tool known to humans. And that is the artistic process, the process by which we create something from nothing, using the resources of the people, the tools, the ideas in our space, and bringing them together through a process over time that generates something new and compelling in an enormously economical, efficient, and effective process of work. And so I want to open up the conversation here to invite you to ask questions about this context that I've shared, to share any thoughts or reflections on it. Because what I'd like to do is hear from you now, take a quick break, and then come back and talk about some of the things, some of the concepts that I see nonprofit arts professionals using every day to navigate this environment that I've shared with you, and to really use the artistic process as a tool to move their work and their organizations forward. So before we take a break, just want to call out, anybody have questions, anybody have comments, thoughts on what I've shared so far, as you think about that.
And I was wondering if we could access some of the statistics or studies that were done around arts education.
Sure, I can share some of that with Sask Arts that they can share out with you.
Thank you so much. I'd love to read more about that.
Sure. Stephen.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's not just the smaller organizations that feel like they're trying to output 30 to 50% more than their financial and human resource inputs. That was eye-opening, I guess.
Yeah, no, it really is a problem across the sector. Every organization, you know, I think oftentimes within our sector, we look at organizations that are a bit larger, that have staffs, that have buildings, et cetera, and we think, oh, they've made it, they're fine. But those organizations are equally pushed beyond their resource base. Their resource base may be larger, but the gap still exists for larger institutions in our sector. It's a prevalent problem. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have one more.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions, or if the Sask Arts Board has any plans on helping organizations disseminate this information to our boards. I find that we get really great information through programs like this, and trying to explain this stuff to our board, even, you know, I don't know, I'm just thinking even like a one-page informational, like I feel like they need to hear this, and trying to get a volunteer board out to programs like this is really difficult sometimes.
Yeah, understood. I hear you. With volunteers and their time commitments, you know, just getting them to our board meetings can be hard. Trying to get them to other things can be really difficult. Thanks for raising that. We definitely try to support getting the information out to boards where we can, and I'm happy to talk with our partners at Sask Arts about what we might be able to do to provide some resources to you to kind of share this along, to become kind of a ripple effect from you to others into your organization. So let me follow that up with the Sask Arts folks, and we'll certainly convey to you any ideas we have about how we can get that information out to you to share with your boards.
Thank you. Sorry, Alex just sent a message saying that we can actually share this recording with our boards, which I didn't think of that. So that would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's one tool that we can definitely make available. Okay, thanks, Gordon. I see your message. Thanks for being here with us. And again, if you want to follow up on the part that you don't get to hear, the recording will be available, and we'll definitely share that out with you.
Thank you. This has been excellent. Really, really good. I'm sorry I have to go to another meeting. It's that 30 to 50% over, you know what I'm saying?
I got it. I know where you're at, but thank you for being here.
You're great. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so let's take a bit of a break, folks. If we're at 5 minutes to 2 right now. If we come back at 5 after, we'll give you about 10 minutes to get up and stretch, Get yourself some refreshments if you need it. And then we'll rejoin to talk about some of the approaches that we might take to navigating the environment in which we're working. All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. As you're coming back, if you can throw up a thumbs up on your screen, just to let me know that you are returning so that I don't start talking to nobody. Here we are. Yeah, good to see you. Thank you. Looks like most of us are back in our spaces. Great. Before I start on the second part of my presentation, I want to draw your attention to a link that I've just dropped into the chat. If you can all navigate to the chat, you can see the link there. If you click on that, it'll take you to a Google document that just has some notes and a couple of diagrams that I'm going to be talking through in the next part of my presentation. Just a little tool to help you with note-taking if you're doing that, so you don't have to scribble things down. So, hi, Heather. Yep. Any questions? Is everybody able to navigate to that and find it? Great, I will assume that's all good. And if you have any problems getting that, you can also get it after the fact from the folks at Sask Arts, so they'll have access to that as well. So as I said before the break, what I want to spend the rest of our time on today is really talking about some concepts that over time we have really learned in working with folks in the sector about the ways in which organizations are navigating the challenges of the current environment. And so, you know, one of the great things for us in doing this work is that we are able to see so many different approaches and ways of working, and we're able to share much of what we learn and see where there are threads, where there are things that sort of happen consistently around the sector that might be helpful for folks who are working in this space to learn from and to understand. And so I want to share a few of these that really have become fundamental parts of the work that we do at Arts Action Research when we're thinking about organizations and how to really strengthen and support them in the work that they're trying to accomplish. And the first of these is really this idea of the artistic process and what a valuable process that is, and how to some degree it has been undervalued in our society, and that we within our own organizations really need to lift up this process that we use regularly to connect our work and create our work in the artistic side, in the programmatic side of our work, and think about this more as a sort of process and a way of working that we could engage in many aspects of the work that we do and find new ways to use the strengths of the artistic process. And I think one of the great strengths of the artistic process is that it combines vision, creativity, intuition, and collaboration, all of these, you know, sort of creative generative aspects with craft, technique, accountability, discipline, and an economical use of time and resources. So it's a process that both embraces and engages the sort of creative elements and the technical elements to bring them together in harmony to create an outcome that is really emergent and unified coming out of that work. It is a process by which, as I said earlier, we're able to create something, a new output, a new outcome in the world, using relatively few resources and relatively minimal research and development time. It is one of our great assets and also one of our great challenges in the sector that we have this ability to really adapt to the sort of things that are available to us. And through this process, which has enormous flexibility, we're able to use those inputs and create something out of them without taking enormous amounts of financial resources and time to do that. And we see in other sectors that are in the business of, in the pursuit of creation of things, that they often do not have the flexibility to create things without enormous input of resources and time. So, for example, since it's top of mind for many of us these days, the creation of new vaccines or medicines is a process that requires an enormous amount of time to achieve, to perfect, to bring to fruition. And it requires enormous amounts of resources through the process to make that happen. And it is not entirely possible for that sector to achieve an outcome without fully receiving the time and resources that are needed to make that happen. Whereas the flexibility in the artistic process allows us to work on multiple different scales and multiple different timelines, and to adapt in real time to changes in the resources that are available or the time that is available. We have a real capacity to get things done in spite of challenges, because this process that is at the heart of the work that we do uses creativity and combines it with the resources that are available in such an efficient way that we can turn out fully realized outcomes without the enormous investment of raw materials. And that's an advantage to us in that it allows us to work in this very volatile and often very under-resourced environment. But it also is a disadvantage to us in that we often perpetuate the scarcity within our sector by continuing to pursue projects that are not fully resourced, that could and should benefit from greater input and opportunities. And so it both gives us flexibility, but also sometimes confines us to producing work with minimal resources and time. The other thing I think that is really important about the artistic process is the way that it works is very collaborative. And whether it's an individual artist creating or a team of artists creating, the process of creating the work and connecting that work to the audiences, to the people that want to engage with it, somewhere in that process, there is collaboration. There is the process of working with and incorporating different people's perspectives, different people's input, and blending those things together to create an outcome that is more than the sum of the parts that go into it. And I think that is a really amazing aspect of the work that we do programmatically and creatively, and that we want to use in the work that we do in building and supporting and sustaining our organizations, and thinking about how can we take the things we learn about collaboration, which quite often in a creative setting involves a group of people who work very much in a sort of equal footing within the collaborative work, bringing ideas together, sharing ideas, exploring ideas, and have a system by which to move those ideas forward through leadership that can emerge from the group or is designated within the group to make key decisions to move the process to the next step as we move towards achieving our shared goals. And thinking about that process and thinking about how we might be able to implement that more within our organizations, how we might be able to think about that collaborative process with our boards, with our community members, with our staffs and teams, and using the strength, flexibility, and capacity of that process to create new outcomes, to allow for emergent ideas, is something that we're seeing a lot of successful arts organizations are pursuing more and more, not trying to structure their organizations like mini businesses, but trying to structure their organizations like arts incubators, like creative forces, like arts movements in terms of process, and finding that that can be a very successful way for them to navigate in the world and to effectively achieve their work. The second concept I want to share with you is the idea of dynamic balance. And dynamic balance is something that we think about for organizations working in this highly volatile environment that I described to you earlier. And one of the challenges of working in this environment is that I think often our instinct is to say we're in a very volatile environment. What we need organizationally is security and stability. What we want to do innately is to create an immovable space, a space that is a fortress that will sustain no matter what's happening around it. And that instinct, while can be innate and natural, is actually not the most effective way to survive and to thrive in a volatile environment. And we can see this in, for example, earthquake zones, where the worst place to be in that volatile changing environment of an earthquake is in a structure that actually does not move at all, because it increases the chance that the volatility is going to break the structure, as opposed to a building or a structure that will move with the forces around it, adapt to the volatility in the environment, and therefore be able to sustain without damage. And so when we thought about the challenges of organizations trying to navigate in this very volatile environment, we really started to think about the kinds of organizations that succeed and the kinds of organizations that we need being ones that embrace the idea of dynamic balance as opposed to a stasis, as opposed to trying to achieve a space of stability and unchangeability. And so I think the metaphor we most often use to describe this for organizations is thinking about yourselves as tightrope walkers. Working in this very volatile environment of the forces of gravity, often of wind currents, et cetera, that are at play on the tightrope walker. And the challenge of staying on this very small wire surface, what happens to a tightrope walker is that they can succeed in achieving their goal of staying on the wire only if they continue to make minute adjustments that respond to the environmental factors around them, adjusting their center of gravity to allow them to stay focused over that wire. And in fact, the only thing that's truly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve as a tightrope walker is to be entirely unmoving, unchanging, and not adapting to things around you. And so you'll see tightrope walkers, quite often they'll have a bar or an umbrella or something with them that they constantly make motions to change their center of balance, moving forward and backward on the wire in order to adjust their position and sustain their position in dynamic, in moving balance. And so this type of approach, this making of small adjustments that adapt to and respond to the volatility in the environment, is what we call complex adaptive behavior. It is small adjustments over time that move us towards bigger adaptations that meet the needs of our environment and help to sustain the health of our organizations. We know that organizations cannot be healthy and balanced if they don't, if they're overextended, if they're out of balance in any aspect of the way that they work and operate. And so we really, in thinking about this idea of dynamic balance and in working with groups about this dynamic balance, we have come to really look at 5 areas of how they operate and to think with them about how those areas are in balance or can be brought into balance dynamically over time. So not into stasis, but into this sort of sense of dynamic balance. And the 5 areas that we really look at that kind of form the core, so to speak, of the center of gravity for an arts organization are professional leadership, vision, beliefs, and core values, relationships, the equation or format in which they operate, and effective processes through which to do their work. And I'm going to highlight each of these quickly in turn to give you an idea of what I mean by these things. The first, professional leadership, is that, you know, an organization cannot be healthy and effectively balanced if they don't have in place key professionals who are leading the organization, who are taking responsibility for the organization, who are defining vision and goals and moving the organization towards those defined vision and goals, and who are recognized and supported both within and outside the organization, who are seen to be the leadership of the organization, who are supported in that role, and who are able to sort of fully express, as the professional leaders of the organization, the authority to move their organizations forward. And where we sometimes see this balance shifting in organizations and getting out of balance is where there are multiple constituencies within the organization who may recognize different leaders of the organization. And we start to see that there isn't a center of balance around that core leadership of the organization. We define the core leadership as the arts professionals, whether it's an individual, a partnership, a collaborative, however it's defined for that organization, but the arts professionals who are in the business and in the activity of setting the vision and fulfilling the goals of the organization. The board, while it plays a very important role in the organization, does not lead the organization in this way. The board is part of that support network, and they are a very key critical component to connecting us with our communities, to building resources, and to supporting the delivery of mission. But we sometimes see organizations where there is a struggle, a power struggle between board leadership and organizational leadership. And that's one situation in which this leadership situation gets out of balance for an organization. So we think about leadership, we think about who's leading, we think about how that leadership is balanced and supported over time. The second thing we look at that is critical to the sort of center of gravity of an organization is the vision, beliefs, and core values of the organization. The ability for the organization to really articulate internally and externally why they exist, what is meaningful and important and unique about this work that they do as an organization. And these things are often those innate things that we all feel and know about our organization that feel like obvious and given to us, and that we deeply feel and hold, but that we don't always share with each other internally within the organization, and that we don't always articulate clearly to folks outside the organization. And we get out of balance when we don't create clarity, understanding, and buy-in around these critical elements of the values that drive us, of the beliefs that underlie our work, and of the vision that we have of where we're headed together. And so we really feel it's important for every organization to do the work of thinking about, writing about, talking about, sharing these critical components of their organization. The next thing that's really important in dynamic balance and in putting our organization in a position to sort of maintain and sustain dynamic balance over time is relationships. Relationships are so pivotal to our organizations, both in terms of the process that we undertake as a collaborative form and working together to create the outcomes, but also because relationships in a sector that is highly under-resourced are really one of the biggest resources that we have. Those relationships help to define our organizations, they help to support our organizations, and they're pivotally important to connecting our work with audiences, with supporters, with communities. every organization has to have a basis for creating and maintaining healthy quality relationships, both internally and externally. And further, it's really critical that organizations that have conflict internally, that have challenges in building internal relationships, resolve those challenges, because without effective and healthy internal relationships, it becomes almost impossible to build effective and healthy external relationships. And your external relationships are your audience relationships, your community relationships, your funding relationships. So if you are unable to build those healthy relationships, your organization is going to be significantly under-resourced. So we really encourage organizations where we see that internal relationships are not being built and maintained in a healthy, effective way to address those issues first in their organization so that they're in a position to really build on and develop healthy and ongoing relationships with their communities, their supporters, and their audiences. The next thing we look at is equation and format. An equation I talked about earlier, I talked about this balance between the inputs, the resources we have in terms of the human, financial, space, time, resources, and the outputs, the programs, services, and activities we undertake. And over time, we don't, aspire to or really achieve stasis in that. We don't get to a place where we're like, these things are completely equal and they will stay completely equal over time. There will always be things that adjust the balance of these. What we don't want is to get into this stasis position where our outputs are considerably above our inputs that many of us find ourselves in. And so we need to actively work in our organizations to adjust the balance here to create a dynamic balance between inputs and outputs such that we create a sort of fluctuation around the equilibrium point rather than getting stuck in stasis in any one point of that equation. And one of the ways that we do that in organizations is in thinking about the format through which we work, the way that we structure our organization, the way that we structure our way of working. That may be shifting from being a project to project kind of operation to building a more baseline, ongoing annual cycle of activity. That may be shifting from being a sort of larger institutional format or structure into a couple of smaller functional units that work separately but collaborate. There are many, many different formats of operations, the ways that we organize and work. But if our format of operation is out of balance with the resources we have and with the programs we're trying to achieve, then over time, we're going to find ourselves in a place in which we're out of dynamic balance, where we're hitting a stasis of disconnect between the resources and the format. And that is going to put us into crisis as an organization. The final thing we look at is organizations that build effective processes for addressing planning, problem solving, decision making, relationship building. It's essential for an organization to work beyond the situational, not simply responding to every situation as it comes along, but to start to think strategically over time and to create processes and ways of working that are based on their own artistic process, and then really take the values of that process and the effective approaches of that process and integrate it in the other activities of the organization, be that decision-making, be that organizational planning. But we look for organizations that over time build, sustain, and renew their processes so that they're constantly in a space where they're addressing the changing environment around them and have robust, ongoing strategic processes within their organization to address those things organizationally over time. And so we have so far this idea of the artistic process as a real foundational important and valuable asset for our organizations, and thinking about that as a tool in our sector. We have this idea of dynamic balance, and really constantly developing and monitoring and building and assessing the balance of our organization towards being in a state of dynamic balance rather than stasis, and looking at that in these 5 critical areas that really form the center of gravity for our organizations. What has sort of grown out of that, and what we've seen in the past number of years in working with many organizations, is that they've gone even beyond this kind of complex adaptive behavior that I described, this, sort of adjustments, minute adjustments that allow us to sort of stay in balance in this volatile environment. And they have built from that an emergent mindset to working. And what I mean by that is that emergence really is when we pull together a number of sort of disparate parts and players in our process. And in doing so, we create an outcome that is more than the sum of its parts, something that emerges from that process, from those raw inputs and materials, that is somehow more than unexpected, emergent in its nature, and that creates new possibilities. And so what we have seen is that organizations that are able to harness this emergence, that think not linearly about how do we get to X point, but how do we pull things together so that we allow for new ideas that we may not imagine now to emerge. Those organizations are often leading in terms of coming up with new solutions and creating new opportunities. And so we really look at organizations and support organizations in developing their capacity for emergent thinking through developing an emergent mindset. And there are a number of different ways to develop this emergent mindset. And in your handout, you'll see a list of these different ways. But I think a couple of key things that I want to highlight here in terms of developing an emergent mindset are that organizations that want to create an environment in which new ideas can emerge, in which new possibilities open up, need to be deeply rooted in their core values and vision, because it is that deep connection to those core principles that gives the freedom to follow pathways that may be uncertain, unknown, that may not have expected outcomes. And so critically important, if you want to be an emergent organization, if you want to adopt an emergent mindset, is really to focus on how do we articulate, affirm, and connect to our core values and vision so that we can take the risks, we can take the opportunities that allow us to provide an environment for emergence. In addition, these are organizations that adopt a learning ethos, that constantly look for opportunities to change and grow and learn. These are organizations that look for the opportunities and act on them. And these are organizations that create opportunities when none are available, that look at how do we generate our own opportunities. These are organizations that look to their networks and understand that by partnering, collaborating, and cross-pollinating, new ideas can emerge. They're organizations that don't live in a silo or isolate themselves, but try and connect and build relationships and networks over time. These are organizations that look at the big picture and not just at discrete elements. They're holistic thinkers, systems thinkers, that really try and see the interconnections between things, because that's often where the emergent ideas come from. And these are organizations that are driven not by external references such as barriers, challenges, or expectations, but are really driven by internal needs, desires, aspirations and try and conform the external realities to those needs, desires, and aspirations, rather than conforming their needs and aspirations to the external barriers and conditions. These are what we call proactive referencing organizations. They reference their internal needs to the external realities, as opposed to confining their internal needs by the external realities. The next thing I want to share with you is best sort of demonstrated through a visual. So what I'm going to do is share my screen here, so you'll see a brief disruption, and hopefully then you will see this image come up in front of you. Because I want to talk now about relationships, and I think this is an important concept. I talked earlier about the importance of relationships, both in terms of balance and the need for us organizationally to have the capacity to build healthy, ongoing, and effective relationships internally and externally. But I also want to kind of emphasize that relationships are critical for us in terms of this collaborative partnership capacity that develops for us the emergent ideas, the new possibilities. And so we have to think about our relationships, about how we relate to each other, both in our organizations and within our communities. And what we have found over time is that when we start to talk to people about relationships, the first thing that they will tell us about in terms of their organizational relationships is something that looks kind of like what I put on the screen here, which traditionally would be called an org chart. We're familiar with it from many different sectors. It's a very hierarchical structure. There's sort of clarity about who reports to whom, who has authority over which other folks. It's a very linear structure. In terms of there's sort of a direct but narrow relationship between one party and the next party. There isn't necessarily a lot of overlap or combination between levels on the hierarchy. And so a lot of organizations, because they're asked to, because there's an expectation around this, are giving their organizational structures in this kind of a format, in this sort of hierarchical organizational diagram. And the reality is that we find that most arts and culture organizations don't really operate in this way. And that putting themselves into these boxes is often a challenging exercise for folks who are working in the sector and working in the ways that arts and culture folks work and arts professionals undertake the work that they do. What we have discovered and learned from the folks that we work with is that how they work is actually much more like this. It's much more of a sort of circular model of working. It's much more community-based. It brings groups together as opposed to sort of a linear one-on-one relationship. It's more of a collaborative group kind of relationship. And so what we see in these organizations is that at the center of the organization, leading the organization, defining the vision, setting the goals, is the leadership of the organization, the professional leadership, however defined for that organization. It might, again, be an individual, it might be partners, it might be a group of folks, but however the organization defines their professional leadership, they are at the center of the work that the organization does. And those folks will bring around them a group of what we call core collaborators, a group of folks who they trust, who know their way of working, who get it, who really understand the work to be done, the values behind the work, the meaning and intention in the work, and who can come into the space and work with that leadership on a very equal collaborative basis to really shape and form the programs, the activities, the organization as needed. That group of core collaborators is sort of consistently engaged, often engaged throughout the process. So if we're doing a new exhibition or production, our core collaborators, those folks who are first in, who are involved very early in the process, they really are our go-to team. And they stick with us, and we maintain those relationships over time. And as we need more support within our organization or within our project that we're undertaking, we pull in a next group of folks, what we call the connected collaborators. These are folks who, they know us and we know them. They understand our way of working and can adapt to and work within the framework of how we work as organizations, as collaborators, as artists. And they come in, they're brought in to sort of build out the team that we have around any particular project or around the work that we're doing organizationally where we need that additional support. They may be involved as connected collaborators with other organizations or activities. They may be with us sometimes and with others sometimes. They can come and go into our universe fairly easily and without a lot of friction. And there are folks that we may have ongoing relationships with, but who aren't involved in every step or every level of the work that we do. And then finally, there's this sort of third tier, this third group of collaborators that we bring in for projects, and they're what we call need-specific team members. This is where, you know, we may have very specific skills that we need or a very specific time frame where we need to really ramp up and bring a lot of folks in. And so we go into the broader community and we find folks that meet those needs. We bring them in for the project. They don't really have to get absorbed into our culture. They can come in and make their contribution and then leave our kind of circle and may never return to our circle of activity. And so, for example, if we're doing a particular production and there's a piano and we need it tuned, we may go for a piano tuner who comes in, who does that work for us and goes out and never really gets absorbed into the culture, but supports and augments the team of folks that we have to do the work. And so there is this sort of cyclical sort of tiers of relationships that we see built around the center in terms of how we really do the work in the artistic side of things and organizationally as arts organizations, how we structure that work. And interestingly, what we've learned over time is that these kind of tiers of relationships are mirrored in the multiple different ways in which we build relationships, in the way that we build relationships with our audiences or patrons, in the way that we build relationships with our funders or supporters, in the way that we build relationships with our communities. And we do other workshops on all of these topics and talk in more detail about these sort of tiers of relationships. But I think what's important to reflect on here is that this kind of nature of building relationships cyclically out from the center is prevalent throughout these healthy, balanced arts organizations that we see across the sector. And so it's a really different way of thinking about relationships, and it often means that we have to think more intentionally about who is in the different tiers or the different circles of relationships with our organizations. The final concept that I want to share with you that we see in terms of organizations that are adapting, that are responding to, and that are succeeding in the volatile environment is a real shift in the concept of planning and thinking about planning as an organization and how you approach that. And I think with planning, you know, one of the challenges that we have with planning is that we often get drawn into sort of old models of planning. Models of planning that are very linear, that look to set goals and build towards a predetermined goal, that know where we're going and simply create an action plan to get there, that are driven towards growth and institutionalization, that have this growth paradigm built into them, that are really about how do we meet the expectations and the values of an external world and what they expect from us, that often strive for solid, immovable, and unchangeable stasis, which is not an effective way of coping with a volatile environment. And so what we have seen is, and what we have worked with in terms of the organizations that we work with, is taking a new approach to planning, to thinking more in our organizations in planning about how we can plan in complex, fluid, and iterative ways, as opposed to linear ways. How we can create spaces in which we articulate vision and create opportunities for new ideas to emerge, and continually adopt, iterate, and change those ideas over time, adopting an approach of complex adaptive behavior, as it were. Looking at ways that we can be more fluid in our planning, not trying to set out a 5-year plan, but thinking about our plan in shorter increments and in more adaptable ways, thinking about our goals as intentions and adapting those to realities as we move forward. And driving ourselves not towards growth and institutionalization, but towards balance and engagement. Moving ourselves into spaces in which we are more deeply engaged with the people in our communities, with the people in our networks, and where we are looking not for stability, but for a state of dynamic balance that will put us in a place of greater health, security, and effectiveness within the dynamic environment in which we work. Planning is essentially at its core an important element for any living organism. It is a deliberative act of change. And I would argue for all of our organizations that are undertaking planning, it's a deliberative act of positive change. We're moving ourselves in the directions towards the realities that we want to create, towards the opportunities and the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And planning really is a very basic set of activities. It starts with establishing clarity about our current reality, understanding the environment in which we work, and the realities of our organization within that environment. It then requires us to clearly articulate our vision for the future, having a shared sense of where we're going, of purpose, of drive, and then developing a constantly adaptive set of strategies to start to move us in the direction of our vision. And recognizing that in a volatile environment, adaptation is one of our best and most successful tools. And so we encourage and we invite you to think about new ways of planning and think about what planning serves for you and how you can create planning approaches that are more effective for the environment in which you work, for the organization that you are, and for the realities of the capacity and resource base that you have. And I think one of the pieces of work that we've been doing a lot over the past number of years is to start to break down this idea that a plan will be a massive document that you will have to show at the end of a process, and starting to think more about a plan as a living process within your organization that is constant and ongoing, but doesn't become a static outcome or output like a huge planning document. So those are the key concepts I wanted to share with you today: the artistic process and how that defines and can support our sector, dynamic balance, and how we think about our organizations not as unchanging and in stasis, but dynamically in balance. Emergence and an emergent mindset, and how do we embrace and develop that kind of approach to thinking and working in our organizations and in our sector. A new relational framework for how we think about how we relate to each other within our organizations and with our communities beyond our organizations. And new ways of thinking about planning and what it means to be an organization in a volatile environment, and developing, adopting, and implementing a plan for where you want to go. That's what I have to share with you today. I know it is a lot. I know I've given you a lot of sort of big concepts here to think about and to adapt to your organizations. I want to again invite you, if you have questions about what I've just talked about, if you have comments or observations that are relevant to the things that I've shared, I would love to hear from you and get any of your reflections. So just open that up.
Well,
hi, Bruce.
hello.
How are you?
Good. I just thought you might like to see a face.
It's nice to see a face.
Yeah.
Good to see you popping in here.
Yeah, sorry I was late, but I just want to say thanks. It was really, really informative, and it was a good session.
Great. Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for being here. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? We're all thinking and absorbing, hopefully. If you do have subsequent thoughts or comments, I can always be reached through Sask Arts. I'm happy to continue to respond to things as well if things come up after this session. Stephen, did you have something you want to ask or add?
I wanted to say thanks to you, and I think it's a really helpful framework, and just we're planning to be part of the smaller cohort process next year, and are in the process of longer term planning than we have done historically, and so I'm really grateful.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Really appreciate that, and glad that it's sort of fitting into some of the thinking for your organization right now and where you're at. So fantastic.
Well, if that's all, we're coming up on our time that we allotted. Thanks again, Anne, and as well for everybody who's attended. Should you wish to get a recording of this, you can reach out to Carmel Pretzlaw. She can provide you with the recording if you wish to share it with your colleagues or your board members. That's a great suggestion. There's a lot of content, and we wouldn't expect you to be able to repeat it at will. So if it's helpful to you, please do let Carmel know, and she can share the link with you for this recording.
Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you all and to have you here, and good luck with next steps for your own organizations.
Thank you, everyone.